So this is fantastic to see everyone coming in here. Marcus, great to see you. Linda Blackaby, welcome. Viv, I'm so glad you're here. Sharon Thompson, Girish, so many friends of ours and of Film Quarterlies, probably David, great to see you. David Forgash, just Fred, welcome. Just a terrific audience for this really, really special event today. Panelists, you can speak up, you can unmute and speak up and welcome anyone you recognize.
Hi, Andy. This is Mara.
Great. Jenny, so glad you're here.
Hey, Georgina, great you're here among our first readers.
Slava, glad that you're here, learning the ropes. I should add, we're going to have another one of these in 2 weeks. So some of our future panelists are here now. It's just really thrilling. Great connections to be made.
Nice to see all the hellos in the chat as well.
Yes. Great.
Hi, Akram. It's nice to see you here, Jordan.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. This is terrific. Viv, I know you're working on your film now. We'll have that up here someday in the future. On macular degeneration, really important for a filmmaker. Yep.
Hi, Josephine. This is Jordan again.
Great. Great. It's thrilling. It's thrilling to see you here, even if you're invisible online. We know you're here. We know you're here. Cambridge. Okay, Jamie Barron, hello. Great. I love these shout outs. Okay. I think in a minute we'll be ready.
Nice to see you. There's Rodney. Hi, Rodney.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, shall we get started? I know people are still coming in, but I think we can get started. I am B. Ruby Rich, the editor of Film Quarterly. I'm an older woman with headphones on, sitting here in an office with a wardrobe behind me and a scarf around my neck and big old glasses. And I'm here to help guide this discussion. We are so thrilled with our new disability media dossier that I co-edited with Faye Ginsberg and Lawrence Carter Long, who are both here with me today. And before we get started, I'm just going to let you hear a word from Mish Fradkin, who's our access coordinator today. Mish.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Mish, the access person for this event. I have white skin, big brown curly hair, a lip piercing, and a striped turtleneck sweater on. There's a very cute blue cat by my side. Just a few access notes before we begin. I'd like to remind our panelists to self-describe and to please speak one at a time and at a pace that is easy for our interpreters to follow. We're pleased to offer CART and ASL today, thanks to our access workers. Please toggle captions on or off by going to the bottom navigation panel and clicking on closed captioning. Our interpreters are showing in the gallery view and there shouldn't be a need to pin them. However, there may be issues with viewing the interpreters and captions simultaneously. If you experience this on a desktop, you may drag the captions anywhere on the screen by clicking and dragging the caption box. You can also adjust the font size of the captions in the settings. As mentioned on the event publicity, we do not recommend using a phone or tablet to access this webinar if you need ASL and CART simultaneously. Please message me if you have any access needs that aren't being met today, and we'll try to come up with a solution. If the Zoom chat isn't accessible for you, you can text me at 908-938-1032. I'll post that in the chat as well. I'll be turning my screen off, but we'll be here for the duration of the event. And just once again, my number is 908-938-1032. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, Mish. Over to you, Faye, for a minute as our co-editor.
Thanks, Ruby, and welcome everyone. Really excited to have this event today. As Ruby said, my name's Faye Ginsberg. I'm an older white woman with short dark hair, glasses, wearing a black shirt, and sitting in a book-filled, pretty messy office. It's been a real pleasure to have the opportunity to edit this dossier with Ruby and our colleague Lawrence Carter-Long for Film Quarterly. It's a first, and also amazing to do a lot of labor on many people's part to have an accessible online version of the work that we are discussing today and in 2 weeks from now. The free, accessible issue demonstrates what it means to embrace the poetics and politics of access, not only in the content of the articles and the works they address, but in the availability of this dossier for those who prefer what Georgina Klieg calls screen scrolling to page turning. So welcome, everyone. We're really excited about this event.
Great. And we're going to get started. We've divided people into pairs based on the articles. And coming up first, we have Lawrence Carter-Long, who's written an article encompassing a lot of different documentaries, and Reid Davenport, filmmaker, as you know, a filmmaker extraordinaire, whose film is discussed, I Didn't See You There, is discussed along with others in Lawrence's piece. Turning the next 10 minutes over to you two.
Thank you, Ruby, and thank you, Faye. It was an honor and a pleasure to co-edit this with you, and I'm thrilled to talk about the new disability media. And I found myself asking, as I was preparing for this, what separates new disability media from what we've seen before? And I think in order to really understand that, right? Disability, as it has traditionally been presented, has always been this outside looking in kind of affair, where predominantly non-disabled filmmakers give viewers a peek inside this mysterious way of being that viewers, I think, intended non-disabled audiences have been blessed to maybe visit, but not live in. And while this view was sort of seldom expressed overtly, it didn't need to be, right? Because it mirrored the dominant view that was already out there in the world. Now this, whether it was Werner Herzog's early documentaries or seminal films like Frederick Wiseman's Titicut Follies, disability had always had this kind of, you're an outsider looking in kind of thing, where we were separate from the rest of the world. I think what sets new disability, what I call the next wave of disability cinema, apart from that, is it starts from the inside and it shines outward. It's a different focus. It's a different point of view and has different intentions. Current crop of filmmakers, collaborations with disabled filmmakers, are actively kind of confronting assumptions, calling out injustices, and ultimately demanding some shift and some kind of change, however uncomfortable that might be to some. So we're seeing a crop of filmmakers sort of replacing these poster child appeals for inclusion with proclamations of purpose that deliver powerful statements that say, in effect, hey, we're here, we've always been here, and we're tired of being ignored. So in my piece, I sort of examined this shift and how important it was and how important it is at this current time in terms of the world and in terms of the type of filmmaking that's being made. That sense of outsidership permeates this current crop of work, and I think it liberates more than it limits. It's often raw, it's personal, it reflects this insider understanding, even an embrace of how in times like these, the films are both inherently personal and political, and somewhat free, unencumbered by the need to be accepted by sort of this non-disabled status quo. First film that I wrote about was Not Going Quietly, Nicholas Bruckman's 2021 feature documentary on activist Addie Barkin, as he embarked on a national community-based campaign to reform healthcare. Now, in Addie's case, this was really important because it's a genuine life and death situation in the film. The reality of living with ALS in a capitalist society required action. It became a catalyst for that action, and Not Going Quietly serves as both, I think, a testimony and before the fact testament to Andy's life, 80s life and 80s work to get legislation passed to fund healthcare for disabled people. Second film I talk about along those lines is disabled filmmaker Jason De Silva's Emmy-winning follow-up to his Emmy-winning When I Walk, where he chronicles the years following his multiple sclerosis diagnosis and his attempt to get closer to his son, which would necessitate a move from where he lives in New York City to Texas. And one of the most harrowing sections of that film, in my estimation, are the distinctions between the life that he now leads, where he's able to have his support team and be a filmmaker. But if he moves to Texas to be with his son, he has to move into a nursing home, essentially putting his life and his work, his career, into mothballs. And it's eye-opening, it's shocking, and it comes from Jason's point of view.
Lawrence, on that dramatic note,
Yes.
your time's up, and I'm going to move to Reid, and we're going to come back to you after everyone's done when we're having our conversation.
I got a question for Reid, if I may.
Please.
I want to talk about the duality, Reid, that we see in your film, right? There's this distinction between not being looked at all or being stared at and not being seen. Can you talk about how that is utilized in your film, especially maybe even the use of new equipment liberated you to tell that story?
Great. Reid?
Sure, thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Ruby. I live with Davenport. I am a white man with a beard and gray hair in my home office. Yeah, I think Lawrence is getting out something really important, is that has really talked about quite a lot even before this, is that documentary has always had this gravitational pull towards disability, but in a very voyeuristic, corrosive, I mean, it will be, it's not progressive at all. That it would be better if it kind of stagnated how we think about disability, but actually corrodes how society deals with disability. And there have been discussions in other marginalized groups about insider forces versus outsider forces. And I think now we are a real turning point where we can start to demand films made with insider voices about disability. This past Sunday, there were 2 feature films made by such insider voices, so there is real progress. And I think with my film, from kind of this micro aspect, I don't show my face, but then I show you my perspective, and I think that is a direct response to how both documentary and society as a whole has really enabled this case, and it was kind of a bit of a frustration that my own films might have been misinterpreted. The audience might have been subjugated me just with me being in front of the camera. So I did the exact opposite, and I made you listen to what I had to say without allowing you the satisfaction of seeing me.
Great. Great. Thank you, Reid. Did you want to ask something else, Lawrence, before we move on?
Oh, I'm curious to know. So you've now just finished your run on PBS, and so making that film available to larger audiences. I'm curious to know, did you have any expectations when you made the deal with PBS, and were there any surprises in the responses?
Sure, well, I actually didn't make a deal with PBS, I made a deal with POV. So big shout out to POV. I think POV was we couldn't have asked for a better distributor because of the access, not the access that we're talking about now, but kind of the access across chaos and across the country that it reaches. And so we were really proud of that. And you know, disability studies scholars, disability knowledge is usually skewed towards people who are middle class to upper middle class. So it was really important for us to reach a broad spectrum of disabled people and people who don't necessarily identify with disability yet.
Great. Thank you, Reid. Thanks for that. We're going to move on. And this is Ruby speaking again. We're going to move on and then we'll come back to everybody in a little bit. So moving on to Neta Alexander and Mara Mills, who wrote this wonderful piece together on Carolyn Lazard's work. So over to you.
Thank you, Ruby. And thank you everyone at Film Quarterly for bringing us together on this theme and this audience of so many old friends and also people I admire in disability and film and media. This is Mara. I'm a white middle-aged woman with brown curly chin-length hair wearing a navy blue dress sitting in my living room. I'll speak for 6 minutes and then Neta will speak for 4 for the timekeeper. So first, let me say it was really a pleasure to get to think alongside Neta Alexander, my co-author, about Carolyn Lazard's work, in particular about their use of captions as an artistic medium. Lazard will be speaking at the NYU Center for Disability Studies with Jerron Herman on April 28th and is not part of this event today. Today, you'll hear an excerpt from me and then from Neta from our article, which is titled Scores, Carolyn Lazard's Crip Minimalism. So captions are a defining feature of the new disability arts movement. And to answer Lawrence's question, I think of new disability arts as a phrase that marks the current swell of disability art, to quote Kevin Gotkin, while acknowledging the long history of work by disabled artists. Lazard is a Philadelphia-based filmmaker, curator, writer, and organizer who reinvents captions across video, performance, and installation art. Their works have been exhibited in the Whitney Biennial, the Venice Biennale, and dozens of museums and galleries around the world, reshaping the discourse around captioning and also living and working with chronic illness and resisting the capitalist pursuit of endless productivity and formal displays of normate ability. Set far afield from its televisual origins, captioning in disability art now takes place anywhere and everywhere. Freed from its status as a device for transcription of pre-existing sound, dialogue, music, sound effects, this type of captioning can reference conjectural sound or act as a spur to thought and performance. In disability art, captioning, whether it's literal or figurative, whether it's just calling the use of any text captioning signifies disability and disability aesthetics, to use Tobin Sieber's term, as opposed to signifying or just being about inclusion. Rebecca, will you show the slide? So most discussions of captioning begin and end with access. What elements of a soundtrack to render into text, the best pace for reading on screen. One of Lazard's better known video works, A Recipe for Disaster, 2018, there's a screenshot here that I'll read part of, counterposes traditional captioning with captions used as media. Taking an episode from 1972 of Julia Child's cooking show, The French Chef, one of the first programs to be broadcast with open captions in the US, Lazard adds their own verbal description of on-screen images as an audio track with vertically scrolling text that covers the screen in yellow captions, read aloud by their frequent collaborator, Konstantina Zavitsanos. And that text is displayed in this screenshot. This narrated text or transcribed narration contrasts access with disability art. I hesitate to read this with Zavitsanos and their amazing voice in the audience, but I will just read part of it. A work made from the conditions of debility or difference, not translated for debility or difference, not an accommodation, where we have to be grateful for getting to join the party. Well, your party sucks, an infrastructure of segregation. So some captioning in new disability arts engages with the approach deaf theater director Jenny Seeley has termed the aesthetics of access. Most people forget that Jenny coined that phrase about 10 years ago. In aesthetics of access, access tools and practices are creatively employed and integral to artworks from video to wall text. But other works refer less or not at all to access, using captioning not as a tool that points to another medium, but as a technique in itself that centers artist, audience, and disability community. Much of this work is minimalist, composed mostly or even entirely of captions or text designated as captions. In other words, disability text. Film was Lazard's first love and the focus of their undergraduate studies, and chronic illness brought a simultaneous abundance and contraction of methods. Their film and video work has moved away from a focus on the image and toward an emphasis on audience in captions. This is a quote from Lazard. The visual vocabulary of my work has become more and more reduced. I'm less concerned with performing competency in an ableist world. It's also an attempt to circumvent the ableist insistence of the visual in the realm of art. There are many ways to register and experience artworks. My practice has become more responsive to the audience and the site of reception. As a formal element of disability minimalism, then captions become primary tools for composition. In their video, text, and installation pieces, Lazard has advanced a style of captions that function as scores, open-ended scripts inviting audience members to activate the work, their bodies, and each other. As performance scores, these captions instruct or otherwise engage with readers and audiences, requesting their participation in the art-making process. Much of Lazard's work with captioning and scores has emerged from ongoing conversations with Zavitsanos, Park MacArthur, and Jordan Lord, among others. Several recent projects with which Neta will discuss have brought what Lazard calls a Black crip ethic or methodology to their captioning. Scores addressing Black and Brown audiences, captions that combine access and opacity and visibility and invisibility.
Okay, wonderful. Neta?
Thank you so much, Ma, for being such a generous and brilliant collaborator. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Neta Alexander. I'm a short white woman with curly dark hair, purple glasses, and facial paralysis. I'm sitting in an office chair facing my MacBook. And I'm going to read the following part. So I'm going to pick it up from where Mara left. So we could closely look at a recent video work by Lazard, illuminating the beauty and potential of disability minimalism and collective work. And Rebecca, you can put the first slide on. So in this video walk, which is titled Notes from the Panorama, Lazard uses scores to address particular audiences, invoking disability justice and Black disability politics. Produced with Amber Rose Johnson for the Black Embodiment Studio in 2021, the video consists of a sequence of historical photograph and archival footage of Black people playing and resting, with open captions that serves as a score for touch, slowness, and meditation, specifically for Black and Brown viewers. The faint yellow captions, sometimes barely legible at the bottom of the screen, are read aloud at a slow pace by Johnson and Lazard, one at a time or in unison. The walk begins with the following statement, and I quote, "Increasingly, many of us are shifting out of a season of separation and into a season of intensified social intimacy, touching, entering, holding, sharing." The soft tone in which this score is being read aloud conveys a sense of grief rather than enthusiasm, a grave realization that those who lost their lives to COVID will no longer be able to enjoy any of these embodied sensations. As the captions remind us, for some of us, this shift is still anticipated. For some of us, there will be no shift. To engage in daily activities such as resting, socializing, or even touching oneself and others is to survive, and people of color are less likely than other groups in the United States to survive COVID. Johnson and Lazard explain that their collaboration is intended to slow time and support embodied awareness during major transitions in the pandemic, which has only intensified the need for rest in Black and Brown communities. This is achieved by providing captions and narration that invite the viewer or listener to touch their own body, loved ones, or environment. Here, the video captions depart from any universalized disability text to reference racialized inequality in the experience of illness, injury, and impairment. The question proposed by Johnson and Lazard is, what does my body want? The open-endedness of this question offers an alternative to the on-demand automated conditioning of digital media. The slow pace of the reading and the use of archival images produce an aesthetic of reflection and vulnerability, celebrating the bodies of those who survived while remembering the bodies who were lost to racism, ableism, and sickness. What Notes from the Panorama remind us is that transitioning from one desire to another is a timely, delicate process that might induce as much pain as joy. So we would like to end this very brief presentation, which is based on our essay that includes many more of Lazard's work, with this meditation on the unequal toll of the pandemic, which is still very much ongoing. A prominent voice in the new disability art movement, Caroline Lazard employed multi-sensorial, haptic, and sonic technologies to remind us that both collaboration and calibration are crucial for creativity, resistance, and survival. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neta. Moving on, I want to bring into the conversation with their presentations, Pooja Rangan and Jordan Lord, and Pooja's essay is on Jordan's work. Wonderful. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you so much, Ruby. And thanks everyone who's made time to join us today. I'm an Indian woman in my late 30s. I have short salt and pepper hair. I'm wearing a shirt that's kind of reptilian in print, and I'm speaking to you from a sparsely furnished study in Northampton, Massachusetts. We may be zoo-bombed by my dog. So I am so delighted to be here speaking with one of my favorite interlocutors, Jordan Lord, about their film Shared Resources, which is the subject of my contribution to the dossier, which is titled Listening in Crip Time, Toward a Counter Theory of Documentary Access. So in industry parlance, access is routinely understood in transactional and extractive terms. And here I'm talking about the documentary industry. So access here telescopes the leveraging of money, force, reputation, or even trust to acquire entrance to private or inaccessible realms that are deemed to harbor documentary value. And this imaginary of access has been with us since roughly the mid-century verite turn. And this is around when it becomes common for documentary filmmakers to conceive of their subjects both as liabilities, but also as resources to be mined. And over the last several years, I think a number of socially committed documentary practitioners have been trying to identify this extractive imaginary of access as one of the maladies of a documentary field that is increasingly driven by, predatory market demands. And so I wrote this essay in part to amplify the transformative work that Jordan has been doing around documentary accountability and narrative justice by enacting what I would call a crip counter discourse of access, understood not as transaction or as theft, but as a shared resource, as a shared risk and a shared responsibility. And I see Jordan's practice, which is really exemplified in shared resources, as an effort to remove documentary relations from the propertied logics of contracts, compliance, audits, liability, and risk management. And their work is, part of a larger conversation among a really wonderful group of queer, trans, and crip of color artists, including Carolyn, but also Tino Zavitsanos, who's with us today, working to foster a more capacious understanding of access as a collective practice of care, support, and accountability. So when access needs are treated not as afterthoughts, but as the fundamental vocabulary of documentary, Jordan shows, it then becomes possible to re-envision documentary values and documentary relationships. And this transformative social vision that is grounded in care and interdependence is ultimately what is at stake in Jordan's decision to employ what they call baked-in access. That is, to use audio descriptions and open captions, not as optional, segregated access features, but in fact as an aesthetic and ethical principle that shapes how their film looks and sounds, and also how it asks us to look and to listen. So the film ostensibly revolves around Jordan's father, Albert, whose eyesight has been threatened by war debilitation, debt, and bankruptcy. And as documentary audiences, we're all familiar with the story arc of the hero's journey, which frames disability as a problem to be overcome. But Jordan is far more interested in how disability and illness have the power to interrupt that story arc, to cast us into what Ellen Samuels, following Alison Kafer, calls the wormhole of crip time, with its unpredictable backward and forward acceleration, jerky stops and starts, tedious intervals, and abrupt endings. So by engaging their mother and sister as audio describers, narrating and describing their own access fatigue while caring for Albert, Jordan activates a whole other dimension of the film than the one that's unfolding in the foreground. The film's collective description as narration takes us through a side door into a staging area of access work, love, care, exhaustion that props up the story of Albert and his recovery. Catherine Bond Stockton describes growing sideways as a queer orientation with regard to temporary and relational destinations that are normalized by the compulsory heterosexuality of growing up. Sideways growth, she writes, is a motion, an emotion, and a growth, even though from certain conventional angles it may look like a way of going nowhere. Shared resources grows sideways by cultivating a crip kind of love for access intimacy, or what Mia Mingus calls the fundamentally speculative, improvisatory, incomplete, and necessary work of caring and support. As a sighted and hearing person, if I were to describe my auditory activity during Jordan's film, I might say I am listening sideways. My listening is being rerouted through the pathways of other people's embodied particularities and access needs. Sensory access, when we understand it this way, is not a supplement. It is an occlusion. It is a curb cut that imaginatively bends our listening toward an apprehension of a world braced by new documentary values of interdependence and shared responsibility. Thanks for your beautiful film, Jordan.
All yours, Jordan.
Thank you, Pooja. This is Jordan Lord speaking. I'm a white person with a buzz cut and a short reddish beard. I'm in my early 30s and I'm wearing a turtleneck that's a nearly identical shade to the oatmeal colored sweater that I'm wearing on top of it. I think this outfit speaks to something that Pooja and I share, which is that we're both Virgos. I'm going to address these comments to you, Pooja, largely because I have so much gratitude for your beautiful essay, but also because I think extending the conversation this essay began is the best way that I can honor it. So much of my joy reading the essay is your understanding of the very real and, for me, inseparable relationship between seemingly unrelated uses of the term access and documentary filmmaking. I'm going to lean on your analysis of this as far as it relates to shared resources, as I actually couldn't have said it better myself. And part of why I appreciate you saying it for or with me is that this is an enormous part of what I want to say about how access works. Not just that it is a relationship of dependency, which of course it is, but also that the thinking around access that informed the film came out of conversation, which now I'm realizing we keep mentioning these folks, but many of them can't talk aloud to us, but it would be great for them to be in the conversation if they'd like to be. And for me, they are, but I want to shout out to Konstantina Zavisanos, Park MacArthur, and Josephine Shokrian, who are all in the audience, as well as Johanna Hedva, John Herman, Finnegan Shannon, and many other people. My hope was that in extending this conversation, so I realized I just said so many names just now, and maybe I'll just put them all in the chat and give some time for the interpreters. I'm really sorry to list so many names. Okay. My hope is that in extending this conversation outward, first to my family and then the audience, other people would join in. And the fact that you did is honestly amazing. Interestingly, though, this is where the other shoe drops. For all of the joy this brings me, I sort of feel compelled to use some of this 5 minutes to discuss something that's been making me very angry about the other creepier use of the term access in terms of permission to film someone's life. One of the things that most disturbed me in my master's program was learning about an industry term called value added, I just did air quotes, that refers to things that might make your film especially appealing to potential funders, particularly this kind of access to people's intimate lives, or as you said, Pooja, trust to acquire entrance to private or inaccessible realms, or what I think we might call, funnily enough, intimacy access. It's telling how this is the precise opposite of what Mia Mingus talks about as access intimacy. In hearing about value added, I thought about how the integration of access features would likely not add to a film's value in the industrial sense when thinking about the very real ways in which access features are considered expensive, are not ordinarily figured into production budgets, and in that sense, subtract from the capitalist cost-benefit economics of value of a given structure. This line of thought proved to be prophetic because, absurdly, Shared Resources was made a licensing offer from a prestigious boutique streaming platform that specializes in idiosyncratic art house cinema, only for that offer to be rescinded months later when the licensing team realized that the film used open captions. Part of why I share this is not just to name the egregious ableism and audism of this platform's policy and what it suggests about this little corner of the film industry. What I also perceive here is how capitalist institutions attempt to incorporate disability access conditionally, and at the same time, how disability access resists or interferes with that incorporation. In thinking about the ways in which it feels similarly uneasy to put a value on a person's life or life story, as it does to assess the worth of making a film accessible to disabled audiences, I think this actually tells us why it might be necessary to subtract from the value of a thing in order to preserve what is invaluable. And in the subtraction of value from the false equation of life with property, sociality with exposure, wideness with depth, access in the way we want it is about spreading a commons that in fact surrounds, exceeds, and interferes with the capturing ambits of property, capital, and value. So I do want to, yeah, we're going to now read the comments in the chat, I think.
Yep, exactly. Thank you so much, Jordan. We're going to take a little bit of time out and just to share for people who need this read, some of what's here in the chat. Lovely to be here from, I'm not going to give the names. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the comments. Lovely to be here from London. Hi from the Field Coast, UK. Hello from Baltimore. Hello from Oregon. Hi from Ithaca. I love this. Greetings from Elise from Long Island. Hello from Ithaca, New York. Hello from Minneapolis. Very excited. Hello and a shout out to Emma Ben Ayoun, who's putting together a special issue for Spectator on disability and media theory. Hello, Fernando Chavez from Costa Rica. Looking forward to the discussion to learn for our film festival. Greetings from Boston. Greetings from Patricia from the Disability Social History Project in Sacramento. Hello from York. Hello from Cambridge, Mass. Hi from Brooklyn.
And you slow that down just a little bit.
Sorry.
Oh,
Greetings from Visual Communications. Greetings from the Twin Cities. Hello from DC. Hi from Scotland. Hello from Buffalo, from New Zealand, from Canada, from Los Angeles, from Toledo, from Albany, from downtown Manhattan. That was bound to happen. Montclair State Disability Caucus. Hello from China. Hello from Oakland, from the North Bay Regional Center. Greetings from Ankara, Turkey. Hello from Memphis. Hi from the Wexner Center in Ohio. And it goes on and on. Hello from East Harlem. Hi to everyone using this app. Excited about this from Santa Barbara. Hello from LA. Hello, everyone. I have bios here, which I'm going to skip for the moment. Going on through here, let me see what else. I'll do the bios at the end in reverse order. In answer to people's questions, yes, there is going to be a recording posted of this on our YouTube page. It'll take about a week to get up there, but it will be there. Where can you find a copy of Film Quarterly in paper? From our website, take a look there. It's not on newsstands, alas. Hello, 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 hello. Great to see the issue of class and socioeconomic base raised here as relevant to disability access to the arts and media. Location for the Carolyn Lazard event. It's going to be held virtually by the NYU Center for Disability Studies. Hello from Chicago. Shout out to the WGBH Media Access Group. And on. Okay. What about filmmakers of color? Pointing out that Carolyn Lazard certainly is one and that Rodney Evans is joining us next week. Each dyad here is having its own fabulous vibe. Hello from Long Island. So delighted to start this overdue conversation. Hello from Brooklyn. And I'm going to stop now and do the reverse commentary of what we're seeing here. Oh, from Jenny Char-Moret. I really appreciate your extremely careful reflections on intrusive intimacy access and ableist capitalization on access technologies, Jordan and Pooja. I love your perspectival reflections on auditory and visual engagement. And Jenny will be in our next one in 2 weeks, also a contributor to the dossier. Greetings from the Caribbean, from Toronto, from Chicago, from Dublin, from Southampton, from the unceded Oneida Nation, land in rural central New York, and asking for copies of some of these talks. They are all online, free for you. both in the traditional website and in a fully accessible website that we've created and that we are posting here. Maybe we'll post these again so nobody misses it. Greetings from Philadelphia, from the Scribe Video Center. Looking forward to screening Reid Davenport's I Didn't See You on February 24th in Philadelphia. Hi from the Bronx, from a New Day Films member owner. Hello from Chris Strayer. And thanks to the ASL interpreters, they are fantastic. Hello from Twin Cities, and hello from Ekram Sendar. Thank you everyone for this lovely gathering, and a shout out to anyone tuning in from hometown Ankara. Okay, I think we'll take a pause a bit later to read the bios, if that's okay with everyone, so we can get on to some of this middle part of the discussion, which we've shortened, to hear from the panelists speaking with each other and expanding on some of what they've said. And I'm going to start calling on you, Pooja, because I think there was something you wanted to ask Jordan. So I'll let you kick this off, but everyone feel free to bring up whatever you ran out of time to say as I did the timekeeping. Turning this over to Pooja.
Thank you, Ruby, and thank you everyone for your warm responses. I'll just say something very brief, and actually it might open up onto something for Neta and Mara to speak about as well. I was reflecting on how much Jordan's experience is about the extent to which inaccessibility and ableism are baked into media, and specifically documentary culture, into the very infrastructure designed for films to come into being, to circulate, and to be distributed. And I'm thinking about your provocation, Jordan, that we might actually have to subtract and have less of something in order to have more. And it's just such a beautiful provocation for us to actually turn some of our values inside out. And I was thinking so much about that in relation to Lawrence and Reid's conversation about a kind of perspectival flip, and really kind of making the connection also to Neta and Mara, kind of identifying Carolyn's aesthetic of subtraction and minimalism, and kind of a way of training us to experience and perceive things differently, but also to kind of practice a different political metal maybe as well. So that's all I'll say, and maybe that resonates with someone else.
Jordan, did you want to say anything about that?
I feel like I already said a lot, and so I'd really love to hear other thoughts about this.
Okay.
And then maybe I can respond to that.
Okay, Lawrence, I want to go to you because you go way back with all of this. And what do you, you're trying some new names for this moment. What do you think about this moment? What kind of sea change does this represent to you in a new disability media?
Well, I think that this is really a differentiation, not a separation, right? Because disability media has been with us ever since The Fake Beggar was filmed in the late 1800s. So Edison was looking at it, but even then, as Reid and I talked about, and I think as others have talked about now, the rules have changed, and so as we see more disabled filmmakers or more disabled protagonists have that kind of agency, even the collaborations are different. So if you're not necessarily the director, disabled people might be the producers, they might be the screenwriters. So there's more agency involved now, and I think you can't get away with the kind of things that have traditionally been done in film. So, a number of years back, and I've done some collaborations with Turner Classic Movies, reframing and sort of reviewing the history of disability in film. The differences that I see now essentially boil down to who gets to create them, who gets to do the work, and who gets to shape the way that it looks, the way that it feels, who gets to make those decisions about access and about minimalism, right? That is an editorial decision. It's a creative decision. It's a political decision. What is seen, who makes that decision, how it's seen, how it's framed, how it's done, all of those things now are upsetting the apple cart. And I think the most constructive, positive ways. And that's probably the newest and freshest aspect that I'm most excited about.
Great, great. Neta, you wanted to say something?
Sure. I actually, this is so exciting, and I actually have a question for Jordan and Reid, because I'm really interested, based on what Jordan just told us, and also Pooja's presentation, in those two models of access within the personalized access, so that associated with domestic spectatorship. So I'm sitting at home and I watch something on my laptop. I get to control the captions. I get to control the playback speed. I can speed it up. I can slow it down. Right? I'm in full control. And then, of course, the movie-going and theatrical distribution model, where in your films you have baked-in access. But I think something that is missed when we're looking at the two models, there's kind of the assumption, the hidden assumption that documentaries, and especially documentaries that has to do with ableism or with disability, they're more about access and they're less about aesthetics. So it doesn't matter if we watch them on a small screen, because it's okay. It's less about the beauty of the frame. But I watched both of your films, and you put so much thought into color, into framing, into the many different aspects of filmmaking. So I guess if you have any thought about these models, especially, during the pandemic or after the pandemic, where many film festivals became online, transformed to hybrid or online, and what would be the ideal spectatorial mode for engaging with your work?
Hi, this is Reid. Thank you for that question. And this may be a bit topological, but I think when films make themselves accessible, if they make themselves accessible, it is an afterthought. And I think my friend and collaborator Cheryl Reid is on this. We spent a month, mostly her, but both who spent writing the captions and writing the audio description. And so I guess I would like to get to a point where I could be a filmmaker that has access baked into my artistry. I don't think I could quite claim that yet. But I mean, at the very least, we need every artist, every filmmaker to be looking at captions and audio description as a piece of art rather than a check mark they X out. They wouldn't do that for color correction. They wouldn't do that for sound design or graphics. So it already needs to be fed into these creative considerations that we all engage with.
Yeah, this is Jordan speaking. I really like what you're saying, Reid, as well, because first of all, I want to say I love your audio description and captions, and I didn't see you there so much. They're really, really good. And I don't necessarily think that for me, baked in access even necessarily means it's always there, right? Like, I think it's actually an important element of a work's politics. Like, if this thing is for everybody or not. And so making the decision to, you know, for instance, there's like artists like Polina KK Brown, which is, I'll put it in the chat again. Sorry, I keep going fast on names. Polina KK Brown, who's an incredible dancer. And in this one work, the audio description is just for a blind or low vision audience. And so there's like this actual privileging of the blind and low vision audience that gets to have a version of the work that nobody else gets to have. But I think the really key thing in what you were saying, Reid, is that it's like, as long as it's not an afterthought, because that's the sort of thing about where access then gets figured as, you know, a deficit in a work's value is when it is thought as the very last thing, and the order of production kind of decides that, right? And like where it's located within a work's budget. I guess I want to clarify a thing that I was saying, which I agree with you, Pooja, that like there's interesting things happening in both my work and also in Carolyn's work around subtraction aesthetically or formally. I always like to think about the ways in which like a caption, for instance, is like a cut within the frame. It literally like takes, you know, like a part of the image, especially like how I do it with like a black bar. There's part of it that isn't there anymore. But it's also, I think, when I think about it aesthetically, it's actually about like something more complicated than addition or subtraction. It's like this thing that's both and. It's like it both adds and takes away. And this both and neither nor thing, I think is actually most helpful to conceptualize like spatially, where it's like a layer, like it's like thicker or denser or more complex. And that's the part about access that I really, or at least these specific forms of access. We were mainly talking, I think, about captions and audio description right now, but there are, of course, many other forms of access that we could think about aesthetically, and also in terms of like, does it actually provide disability access for the audience or the makers or the people behind the camera, right? But I also think that, yeah, so like what I was trying to think about with y'all is sort of this tension between maybe how we want to use access as an aesthetic or formal tool, how those things brush up against questions of like calculus, right, of addition or subtraction, and the kind of like specter that value has in all of this. And that specter of value is not that's not like separate from the work, right? It actually is like one of the conditions of possibility for the work is all of the different ways in which like people's lives, and especially disabled life, is it is seen as like surplus or extra, or it like not worth anything, right? Or is seen as only valuable to the extent that you can extract value from it. And so like what I'm interested in about what this platform did to me and like through their policy is that they kind of like iterated a thing that was already a kind of like unspoken truth in this way that I think it's interesting, right? That the value that like the value in kind of interfering with the logic of what one should prioritize, it shows us something about the way that like access and disability function in these like systems of value. Sorry, I feel like I went on too long.
No, that's fine. I think we have a couple of minutes to continue this before we start taking up the chat and other questions. Did someone else want to add to this? I look forward to the day when media that doesn't have captions and audio description, everything else will feel lacking. But sorry, Mara, I think you were about to say something.
It was just a response to the part of Pooja's question about the historical inaccessibility of certain genres or certain media forms. And when Neta and I started writing this essay on Lazard, and also the care community that Lazard is part of, and the methods that have been, and the media that have been developed in that community, at first, the argument we were making had to do with the proliferation of captions in this digital moment, especially in an online moment. And actually, because Ruby pressed us in her editorial comments to explain what captions are, I started thinking a little bit more about the history of captioning, and in particular, the history of captioning in the digital era. And I was instantly reminded that it's captioning. Yeah, we are making an argument that captions are a tool of composition. It's an argument that these artists themselves have made. But that is not to say that these are easy tools or they're fixed tools or they're not hard-won tools. The National Association for the Deaf has had to fight, blood, sweat, and tears, a series of legal battles with each, streaming protocol, with each receiver, and with each piece of software. So like production, transmission, and reception end of captioning to make sure those things are accessible. And it's an ongoing battle with each new device, with each new piece of software. It's so we wrote a little bit about that in our piece, and the fact that the ADA didn't start to apply to online businesses until the NAD sued Netflix in 2010, and that precipitated certain changes in streaming protocols. But we're not done. So yes, captions are a medium, but this is a medium that is fraught, and there's like a legacy of like tons of disability activism making that medium continue to work and to iterate across all sorts of new platforms.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to read from the captions over the past 15 minutes. A lot has come in, and then we're going to proceed to talk among ourselves and to take your questions. Anything you put into the Q&A, we'll try to address. So here goes from the chat. Pam Sporn writes, we are screening I Didn't See You There in Cuba in March. It's amazing. If the organizers post a link to the NYU event, and Faye has posted the link to the Disability Center for people to sign up to be notified of that event that's coming up. Jenny Shamrat writes, disability film history and disability film archives are so important. She's going to be speaking again next time in 2 weeks from now. For those interested in the archival side, Anna Briggs writes, members of the Association of Moving Image Archivists inaugurated an accessibility committee last year, working on different avenues of research and archival practice. Judy Leaf writes, as a professor, what Reid just expressed is crucial to the educational system to be addressed with aspiring filmmakers. Lots of interest in the archival initiative, people wanting to get involved. Inclusive thought should be added to curriculum planning for media makers, using some of the language being used here to help our colleagues understand, says Alice Elliott. Again, a lot of interest on telling people to become members of AMIA. Oh, good. Okay. Very good. Fiona Branson, access is for all, should not be solely about people who are politically and intellectually able to identify as disabled, because there will always be people who are not able to do that, to include those who are disabled and excluded from content. And from Pooja, disability film history, Jennifer Casanave is working on a great dismedia history of street tapes made by the People's Video Theater in coordination with Disabled in Action. That's great to know. Sorry, I'm going to let someone else talk for a minute while I get over this. Faye, can I toss this to you, perhaps?
Absolutely. One thing I just want to point out that Ruby and I put into the introduction, because there is so much attention to all the fantastic kinds of issues that all of you have raised in both your filmmaking and your writing or your media making. I'm going to just suggest for all those people who work in universities and teach out there. I mean, one of the first things I had to do was go to every theater on campus, and when I started organizing events with Lawrence Carter-Long, and figure out how many power chairs I could get into every theater on campus. And that was a very interesting inventory that I don't think had been done before, and how to hold events for people who have to depend on the really terrible accessible transportation in New York City. So we started having our receptions before our screening so that everybody had time to get there, which meant everybody also had a bit of wine or beer in them by the time they watched a film, which always made for more interesting screenings. But just to remind people of, it's like the outside in, like you just have to keep thinking. It's a great exercise to give your students, to ask them to go around and monitor these things, and for those people who are teaching, and just pay attention to how the many levels of access. And I just so appreciate Mara pointing out the amount of activism that's gone into these different lawsuits and so many things about the materiality of streaming and all the different ways people are receiving media now. So we can't ever lose sight of that. And it's a really fantastic way into introducing younger people into understanding the importance of this work. So just not to forget those things.
Great. And here's a question from Jill Ulian to everyone. How to address more anti-ableism issues in the non-disabled population that tends to have such low interest in disability issues and often responds with backlash. So this is a very good question. And I should say, in some of the circles I move through, I've already heard backlash about open captioning, resentment from hearing people, visually sighted people, about accommodations that spoil their experience. So I'd be curious to hear any activism around that too. I'll piggyback that onto that question. Anybody want to contribute?
I'm going to say one more thing, which is despite the backlash, so we heard about that at Sundance this year, for example, I'm going to be optimistic, because I am really finding in teaching that as more and more people, young people who've grown up post ADA, are themselves, first of all, disabled, living with folks with disability. I mean, their embrace of this as a reality is so different than what was true when I was growing up, for example. And people, there's a lot of receptivity. And I think just pointing at this out at so many levels completely changes their view of what's going on. And, you can give assignments to people to like check their campus and, figure it out. And, it's a really good, I know we've done that. I don't know, I always say, like, one of the assignments in any good course on disability is going to involve bathrooms, for example. So, which is important after viewing. You need to be able to have access to that. And, don't believe the sign, always check the bathroom. So that's my wisdom for right now.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I would just like to call BS on that, because, non-English language films, nobody complains about the subtitles, right? It's just part of that experience. I think those who complain about such things, either one, haven't experienced it, or two, don't have a lot of imagination. I think it's really incumbent upon us to push back against that kind of limited way of thinking and that lack of imagination, because what we're seeing more and more is that those who experience captioning and even audio description, I helped the folks at Planet Money at NPR review a story that's coming out, I think, either this week or next week, about how people are using audio description almost as a radio. And they can go about their business, make their food, wash their dishes, clean the house, and still catch what's going on in the show. So I think those folks who are pushing back or fighting against these changes are relics of the past.
But if I may, I read the question as, what do we do when we face ableism that will not relax? And that's a very real concern. We can all stay up here and talk about theories and talk about what we do in our ivory towers, but there are a lot of environments in the US, throughout the world, where it seems that ableism is immovable. And I don't have a good answer for that. And I also do sort of ground us to say that there is a lot of acute with ableism that we are not able to address, or that is outside, that needs to be addressed, that isn't being addressed.
Great. Thank you, Reid. There's a lot of wonderful questions coming in, so I'm just going to start us on those. There's one in the Q&A from Don Waleski saying, Jordan and all, if lack of access is debt, then is access an abundance? Is it capital that can be exchanged? If so, how do we prevent the elite capture of performing access, which results in deficit for our communities? This may have a relationship to Neta's audience comment of private and or domestic space versus more public forums. Anyone want to comment on that? It's an interesting point. I'm not sure it needs an answer, but oh yeah, Neta, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Jordan, do you want to?
I do have some thoughts about the responding to that. I also, if it's okay, I wanted to just mention a thing in response to what Lawrence was just saying about like thinking disability access in terms of both the demand and the way that people either are okay with or not okay with subtitles. I do think I just want to put like a sort of like a, what is that like thing that Rachel Maddow says, like, where she's like hold this space for now or whatever. But, yeah, like I do think it's really key that we also do think and sort of like really take up the question of subtitles as they also relate to these questions of disability access, where just to give some more context to why the film was rejected from, you know, the offer was rescinded, is that that platform hosts itself also on Amazon, which not that I want my film on Amazon, but it's not an unreasonable question that they're raising about how does one deal with the presence of open captions in a context where something might be streamed in multiple languages? I think the problem is just that they stop there rather than thinking, okay, well, there are actually formal solutions where we could have both. Like we could still have the English captions the English language captions that are an integral part of the image, but also make a space for other translations of those captions into non-English languages. So I just want to say, like, I do really think it's important when we're talking about open captions that we do ask this as a question, like, how do we go outside of like the Anglocentrism of like having English open captions burned into our films? In relation to the question about debt, which I'm going to try not to talk too much, but I would just say that maybe there's a way that I would think it also the opposite way, that like it's not just lack of access that's debt, but like access itself is debt. That's sort of what my film is about in some way, like the way in which debt is both this thing that's really stigmatized and seems to be about like a loss, and at the same time like how that debt is also surplus and is about a kind of like bondedness between different people and is a kind of responsibility or entanglement. And so there's a lot more to say there. Maybe I'll try to write it down. But yes, I think it's a really good question. And certainly I don't even know if it's like, it's definitely happening that there is elite capture performing access all the time. I think the invitation to my film was an example of that. And then the fact that it was rescinded was also an example of like, they don't actually want access. They want like the performance of access.
Great point to end on. I'm going to read a bunch of the comments in the chat because this is really heated up and is wonderful. From Mexico, Julieta Cuevas writes, thank you all for your insights and essays. In the dossier, I wonder if you could speak about the differences of access across countries and languages, considering the dominion of English and the site of production of most technologies related to film and video. Just part of my research regarding deaf in Mexico and their access to film. So that's a great piggyback onto that. I'm going to read more because it's a lot of comments here. For Jeremy Chamaret, talking about positivity and open conversation in students and agreeing with Faye that there's a lot of hope in future transformations. Students recognize their shared vulnerability and need for mutual aid. Anna Briggs, again, a lot of millennials and younger people I encounter embrace captions for a multiplicity of reasons, also beyond accessibility needs. There's some shout outs here to Lawrence, to all of you. Slava Greenberg notes there's a great activist initiative for campuses. It's called Fuck Stairs. Look them up. They're a good way to get students involved. Patty Zimmerman writes that she's on the board of the local nonprofit art cinema in Ithaca, Cinemapolis, and 2 weeks ago initiated Masked Tuesdays, fully masked, and Open Caption Wednesdays. And on Faye's point, positive response from moviegoers exceeded by far what anyone expected, from families with young children to, well, everybody. And it's been celebrated by the local press as well, a moment of hope in a very turbulent landscape right now in art cinema exhibition. So lots of kudos to all of you, lots of yay and different names. And Dawn asks, how do we prevent the elite capture of performing access, which results in deficits for our communities? This may have a relationship to Neta's audience comment of private and or domestic space versus more public forums. Mara's quoting Tina Zavatsanos on Beyond Exchange, give and take and take. Fiona Pranson writes, I'm seriously pro-captioning. I really appreciate it. Oh, but she says it should be an option because for people with literacy issues or acute dyslexia, then it may be the opposite of access. Konstantina Zavatsanos writes, maybe the subtractive process of Lazard isn't for inclusion per se, even though the results, as well as the processes themselves, are accessible. Likewise, maybe debt need not be akin to lack. Again, lots of thanks to everyone. From Mara, Lazard also discusses scores, captions, access as a possible mode of necessary obfuscation, fugitivity, and opacity, and agreeing with Zavatsanos that access is not always about inclusion. And Jordan writes back, thanking Dawn for the question and seconding everything Constantine is saying in the chat above about access and debt. Okay, back to all of you. Who wants to engage with any of those great comments? This is such a rich conversation, and we're in the final 10 minutes or so of it. So if you've been holding back, this is the moment. Neta, is your hand up again?
Yeah, I want to take a quick moment just to dismantle, I think, kind of a common misconception about access. I mean, access seems to be connected to both aesthetic and temporality, with the misconception that this is about burdening the text or subtracting something and also slowing it down, which might be confused with the idea of creep time. But what I'm trying to do, building on the work of Mara and Jonathan Stern on the history of blind students, is to also show that actually access is not necessarily slowing down, but rather it is about the ability to calibrate something to your own needs. So in the case of audio descriptions and Netflix, it means speeding up. And this is a demand that came from blind Netflix subscriber who wanted to embed the playback speed into the interface. And so Netflix initially was trying to embed that feature in 2018, but then Hollywood filmmakers said, oh, no, we don't want anyone to, God forbid, to speed watch, the beautiful canonical classic by Seth Rogen and so on, and his ilk. And so Netflix decided to take the feature away, and then they brought it back in 2020 during the pandemic as an accessibility feature. So I think our job as media scholars is to call it for what it is, which is in this case creep washing, and to be able to to pinpoint and to map the cases in which access is monetized in a very cynical way by these streaming companies and conglomerates, and when this is something that is actually coming from inside the community or in response to the people who are actually seeking. And the last thing I will say is, as someone who I'm not a native speaker of English, so for me, every time I went to the cinema in every country in the world I lived in, whenever I could have caption, that just made my day. And if I couldn't have access to caption in many instances, I just couldn't watch the film or engage in cultural activity. So this is definitely not just something for deaf people or for specific populations.
Good points. I'm going to go to Faye and then Pooja. Faye?
Yes, this is a little bit off topic. I just been thinking about this a lot with especially Jordan and Pooja's conversation. And maybe this is because I'm also an anthropologist and I also do a lot of work with Indigenous media makers. And I'm wondering if you've ever thought about moving the conversation about debt to questions of reciprocity, because I feel, I mean, that's, for example, there's a big reciprocity project going on at the big Indigenous film collective called Neta, where the idea of, you know, give, and I saw, I think Tina Zatsana's had give and take, but this idea of a built-in exchange between generations and between audiences. So you don't have to answer that. I just wanted to throw it out there to see if we could get outside a more capitalist language that I think might be really productive, and also claim a kind of disability sensibility that has to do with, you know, forms of interdependence. Let me put it that way.
That's great, Faye. Thank you so much. Pooja?
Thanks everyone for just this richness of exchange that is building. I just wanted to pipe in and, you know, just say what is like so charmingly referred to as foreign language film. Is really, I mean, it gives us an opportunity for thinking about a form of creating access through deliberate exclusion, a kind of refusal of the Anglophone, right? Like of Anglobalization. And so I think it's just another way of returning to what came up in the chat around modes of subtraction that are not about inclusion, and that are in fact about other ways that access works and other functions that it has. And here I just wanted to point folks back to Neta and Mara's terrific essay, because I was trying to kind of keep track of all of the ways you kind of count the other ways that access counts, right? It can be about intimacy, about justice. It can be about eventfulness, a way of signaling, of telescoping, of composing, of scoring, of instructing. And so there are so many ways that access is about being together. And just one more thing, I'll pull out a quote from your essay where you wrote, "What disability brings to minimalism is not economy, but rather necessity." And I thought that that was such a beautiful way of getting once again outside of the many ways that capitalism colonizes the way we can think about value, right? Like to think of necessity and not economy. So yeah.
Great. Jordan, I see you have your hand up. Thanks, Pooja, for that.
Yeah, this is Jordan speaking. I love what you just said, Pooja, and I wanted to kind of follow up on this in relation to the question about exchange, and also the thing that Tina raises in the chat. Tina asks, can a filmmaker here discuss the functions or concepts of opt-in versus opt-out, to follow up on what Fiona asked. And I also just wanted to shout out, Fiona's question is really like super interesting. It was asked, it's like under the answered section, intimacy, access, accessing intimacy. How do we ensure disabled users of active, sorry, I need to speak slower. Was this the question, Tina, that you were referring to, or was there a different one? The one that was in the Q&A? Yeah. So regarding intimacy access or accessing intimacy, how do we ensure disabled users of active implantable medical devices, howsoever applied, are not exploited and used without consent as material to create FTV/AI content? I need to like understand better what the second part of the question is about, around the FTV AI content. If someone can like put in the chat or say out loud to me what that is, it's not something I'm fully familiar with. I see Mara responded, implantable medical devices are made and marketed by a relatively small number of multinational corporations, Cochlear, 3M, etc. And with that comes many layers of bias, algorithmic bias, and speech processors for CI and exploitation, including everyday issues of lack of maintenance for implants in certain parts of the world.
You are reading so fast, I can't even.
I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yes. You lost me back there.
Sure. Where should I go back to? Mara's response or Fiona's question?
I would take a pick because we only have 5 minutes left, Jordan.
Yeah,
okay.
Just the response.
So I'll try to answer the part I understand, and then maybe Mara can jump in. So in terms of the kind of questions around reciprocity that Faye was raising before, I guess I just do want to reiterate this logic that Tina wrote about in the chat of give and give and take. Like, this is explicitly not a dynamic of reciprocity exactly. It's something that is more it's like outside of the logic of like, I give you this, you give me that. It's actually like I take from you, you take from me, and that's the debt part, right? Or it doesn't even have to be a and, right? And this is a kind of calculus that is, I think, really uncomfortable for people like that are trying to, where we're all, many of the, I don't know what I'm saying. It's really uncomfortable, right? Because that's supposed to be bad. But this is actually an insight that I think disability gives us about life, is that life is indebtedness to others. And so my kind of question, my response to Tina's question about the opt-in, opt-out is about kind of this dynamic where you're not necessarily trying to, I just, oh my God, I've totally lost my train of thought. But basically the opt-in, opt-out part, I think for me, oh, right, because it deeply raises this question of consent and Fiona's question. The opt-in, opt-out part in terms of like agency or choice, I'm interested in how by having the baked in access, it's sort of fun, the reason behind the not giving a choice is about a kind of question of desegregation, right? That historically through the creation of like a separate but equal version of the film through having the closed captions come last and after, or the audio description track in that same way, it is about a question of desegregation. But that's not to say, like, as Pooja was talking about, that like sort of the withholding or the sort of like response to like a choice, like for instance, like the whole film revolves around my dad's like opting out actually from the process of like co-audio describing the film. And so I do think, sorry, this is not going to be a very thoughtfully ended answer, but I do think like what is still very much at stake is sort of like finding these places where there is a need to restrict access as well. So I'm sorry, I lost my thought, but that's what I have.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good. Just wrapping up, Alex Uhash wrote that Mask Tuesdays are a wonderful example of what some in What Would an HIV Doula Do collective are calling practicing COVID inclusion. So more on that should be forthcoming. An interesting comment for Lawrence Carter Long from Jay Afrasando about the audio description used like radio, that it reminds him a lot of soccer coverage on radio pre-2000, pre-internet in Indonesia. And he's just recently realized that this kind of show is so accessible not only to blind people, but also to non-disabled soccer fans who couldn't afford TV. So a lot of really interesting comments here. Another one from Beth Haller, that the Netflix accessibility director is a CODA. And she talks about her perspectives in a video that's on YouTube. And on implants, Mara says, check out Darren Martin's sound and image work. Darren's here in the audience. Thank you for that. People are saying a lot of this is great for future research. And Carrie Reese, I watched an instructional video last week about how newer media recording technologies with on-person microphones make it more difficult to understand speech. And this is called an increase in people watching video with subtitles. Wondering whether Louise Hickman might be doing some work on this. Lots of wonderful new things. The link to our dossier again. And in this final minute, I just want to say, thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to Joshua Edwards, who's been doing this amazing captioning. Thanks to Marianne Linfant Jacobson and to Lynn Maturano, the ASL interpreters who've been put through it in this session. And thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to everybody for setting this up. And for the 150 of you who are here with us online in the dark. putting out these absolutely fantastic comments. This has been a spectacular experience, and we're at our hour-and-a-half mark. Thank you, everyone. Stay tuned. 2 weeks from now, we're back.